on behalf of the Holyoke Public Library, Puerto Rican Cultural Project, la Familia Hispana Inc., Poder, Saber es Poder, Hispanic American Library, Nueva Esperanza y el Corazón, the Heart of Holyoke. Welcome our first speaker of the Puerto Rican series speaker for this year. Last time we end the year with a professor from Smith College, but now we go back to New York City. A nombre de todos los que mencioné, bienvenido a la Biblioteca Pública de Holyoke. Este es los primeros oradores de la serie de oradores puertorriqueños, directamente de Nueva York, Carmen, Vivian, Rivera y Andrés Torres. Es claro que vemos muchos socialistas aquí. The next speaker is going to be May 12. It's going to be Carlo Melente, who just published a new book, Sponsored Migration, the State of Puerto Rican Post-War Migration to the United States. Please give me or Maria Pagan your email. We will contact you with the next, when is the next speaker. Also in the pipeline is Cano Santiago and Edna Costa Belén that just reprint a new, the classic book, Puerto Rican in the United States Contemporary Portrait. Cano Santiago is the Commissioner of Higher Education in Massachusetts. And the last one, March 13, there's a conference in UMass, University of Massachusetts, at the Marriott Center from 1 to 7. The main speaker is going to be Jorge Duanis from Florida International University. Also Arturo Masol, Casa Pueblo in Puerto Rico, not the father, the son. Nelson va a estar allí too, is one of the speakers. Por lo tanto, that's it. Are you ready? A nombre de Holyoke, le damos la bienvenida a un viejo colega, Andrés Torres, y a Carmen Vivian Rivera.
At some point we can turn down the lights so you can see a bit better. I do want to thank all of the sponsors, though, for inviting us here this afternoon to share the information on this project that we have been working on for several years now. But before I even begin that, I just maybe wanted to say a few words about what I am going to be presenting with Andrés. Which is a bit of a history on the Puerto Rican Socialist Party and the work that we did here in the United States. So it's the branch, the US branch of the PSP. When I became a militant activist in that organization, I was back in the 1970s. I was 21. And my mother said to me, "Pero por qué? Why? You weren't born in Puerto Rico. You never lived in Puerto Rico. You were born here. You're an American." So she was really in despair, right? And she said to me, "This is dangerous." Basically, my mother was scared. She was scared for me. But today, what we are going to do is present to you just a highlight of that history, of that movement, and of the organization that we both became very committed to, and And when we finish this, we want to hear from you. Because there are many new movements that are rising up and that we want to make links with and speak to. So we hope that this will generate a good discussion between us, because this is kind of a listening tour that we're doing. We want to present you some history, and then we want to hear from you. Okay. Moving this, I guess I should use this thing here, right? Okay,
That's right.
let's see.
So that will only turn this on and off.
Oh.
You can use your laptop.
I can use the, okay, great. So, the beginnings of this organization are in Puerto Rico. And it was the Movimiento Pro-Independencia. That was the organization that was formed in Ponce, Puerto Rico in November of 1959. And that was basically a new movement of the independence forces of Puerto Rico, all right? It included people from the Nationalist Party, from the Communist Party, from the Puerto Rican Independence Party, independentistas that were non-affiliated perhaps, and that formed this organization. In 1961, the leader of that MPI, Juan Marigras, came to New York to meet with a group of people who were in El Barrio in New York City in East Harlem, and they had formed a group of the MPI called De la Misión Vito Marcantonio. That was formed in 1961. These were the people who were part of that group. Can you bring down the lights a little more? Because I think it's, yeah. I think it'll give people a better sight. And that's Juan Marigras there in the center with the suit on. So one of the things about this movement and the MPI and PSP in particular was that there was always a lot of writings and analysis on the current reality of the time and the programmatic points that they wanted to bring out. So that was the first political document that came out in 1963, La Hora de la Independencia, the Hour for Independence. And then this came out in '69, Presente y Futuro de Puerto Rico, which was a kind of a leading into what was beginning to stir in the debates among the members of MPI, which was, do you stay as kind of a mass, broad coalition or alliance format, or do you work towards creating a party? A political party, and one that proclaimed to be a socialist organization. So following a model more of what was in those times a Marxist-Leninist party.
So then, 1971 is the transformation of what was originally the Movimiento Pro-Independencia. Clear right up front, we are for the independence of Puerto Rico. Again, Puerto Rico, a colony of the United States. That was the analysis, right? So in 1971, they decided to transform from being a movement for independence to being a little more specific and concrete in terms of how and what would this future society look like. And that's when it becomes the Partido Socialista Puertorriqueño, the Puerto Rican Socialist Party. And that is that first important document. Again, as she said, analysis of the situation and what to do about it. This is the continuity of the PSP on the island, continuing here in the diaspora. So then it becomes the Partido Socialista Puertorriqueño, the Puerto Rican Socialist Party, U.S. branch, a colony which has a third of its population in the territory of the colonizer. 1/3 of all Puerto Ricans at that point already were living in the United States. And we had Puerto Ricanos here. We had an enclave here in Holyoke, Springfield, Waterbury, Boston, of course, and so forth. So it was evident that if you wanted to organize around independence for Puerto Rico, you had to be thinking about, well, what do we do with that 1/3 that's living in the United States? And so these are examples in those early 70s of some of the campaigns and struggles that the PSP U.S. branch were involved in. Again, thinking back that time, you had other very important organizations such as the Young Lords and Comité and so forth, which were part of that uprising of second generation Boricuas in the United States. Here is a sort of laying out of the various so-called influences that caused so many of our young people at that time, yes, at one time we were young back then, to say socialism, independence, those are bad words. You could be thrown in jail in Puerto Rico up until the mid-50s for even flying the Puerto Rican flag. Those are outrage, because it was saying, Uncle Sam, what, you know, they're good to us. They do everything for our benefit, right? And so we challenged all of that. And those are various things that were coming together, that incredible period of the 60s and 70s that had a huge impact on Puerto Ricans in the United States and of course in Puerto Rico.
Okay.
Here was, that document was 71. Here was the first organized Congress of the PSP in the United States. That's a nice little crowd, isn't it? Right? Now, this is not a party. This is not a social club. It's not even a church. Right? This was an organization saying that it was time for a revolution here in this country. That was the only way, right, to really deal with the political and economic situation in this country and in our communities. This was held in New York City, but people came from all over the Puerto Rican diaspora. And these are various documents and studies that we, yes, Puerto Ricans do have the capacity and the skill and the ability to analyze the situation. We don't need other people telling us what's wrong in our communities. You just don't want to support us. We're talking about the general society here, right? Like when Mr. Orange Hair throws towels into the press conference in Guaynabo, you're trying to help us? Give us a break. The more things change, the more they seem to stay the same.
So at its peak, which really was for the 1970s, that period, that decade, at its peak, we probably had around 49 chapters in communities and workplaces throughout the United States, right? And we had 8 affiliates in colleges, which was an organization that was formed for university students, and then university staff also formed in 8 different colleges what we call the nucleus, los núcleos del partido, right, which were like a chapter. And this is what it looked like in terms of the states in which we were organized. So most, obviously, along the East Coast, all along from, you know, all the way up in Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Jersey, in New York, Pennsylvania, Delaware, in Washington, D.C., and then along the Midwest, in Wisconsin, in Illinois, and Indiana, even in Texas. You always find us somewhere. Como el arroz blanco. And in California. Where there were 2 chapters. So this is the way it broke down. And yes, we had groups here in Springfield and in Holyoke. we were hoping that we might see some compañeras and compañeros who were part of that here today. And they were part of this history. But this was the different groups, and within these groups, then they had study circles, right? So it wasn't just these chapters that existed, but for example, even here in Holyoke, they could have had a study group of people who were not members of the PSP, but who were supporters, who were interested. So they would come and they would have study circles and groups that they formed where they would do political education and talk about history of Puerto Rico, the current reality, what it was that the PSP believed in and why, and what our program was. These were the ones that were organized, some in the workplace, in different, with different unions. So hotel workers in New York were very organized, the postal workers in New Jersey, the farm workers. There was an organization that was formed, La Asociación de Trabajadores Agrícolas, which included workers from New Jersey, from Pennsylvania, and other groups of the same type. And then this along, if you look at, the New York City has the City University of New York system, the CUNY system, and we were very organized within that system.
Another aspect of the work that the PSP did was direct action, large turnout and mobilizations for either for important days in the Boricua calendar, la fecha patriótica, el grito de Lares, Jayuya, and so forth. If you are going to liberate a colonized people, you have to start first up here. First up here, making Puerto Ricans understand that they are of value. And when I talk about Puerto Ricans, I'm obviously talking about other oppressed and discriminated populations. Every population to this day, including in the United States, that is dealing with lots of poverty, with lots of discrimination, and mass incarceration, all that sort of stuff. To liberate that people, you have to begin up here. You have to know your history and trace back to what are the evolution in that population. And so we had lots of mobilizations over here in New York City, I think that is, and Desfile Puerto Rican. You know how important that is now in all of our communities. The Desfile Puerto Rican used to be a place basically to showcase businesses. Rheingold beer, Ballantyne's beer. All the businesses that like to sell their stuff, they see us as a market, right, to sell. So they love the parades. And we said, you know what? The parade is not just about bringing our market to you so that you can sell stuff to us. It's about us educating, taking that opportunity to educate our people about the true reality. So we saw those parades as an organizing setting. So we would bring materials, we would have strong mobilizations, we would bring giant Puerto Rican flags, and to avanzar con la cuestión del orgullo puertorriqueño. And along the sides, because the Puerto Rican parade in New York City, you're talking about 800, 900,000 people that one day, where people come from all over, all right, to New York City, and not just to see, the latest products of the various campaigns and the beauty queens and all of that, fine, with the police in the front, as if they were the one in charge, right? We said, no, we are here to use this as an education opportunity to challenge the way that our people are represented in the media, in politics, and so forth. And so here are more examples of that sort of. This is of an earlier Puerto Rican Day Parade in New York City. This was a massive protest march that we participated in. The idea here is not only that we did things all by ourselves, but in the point of view of the previous speaker on the Taino reality. They want to unite. They're looking for ways to spread their message so that if you think that that is an important identity to develop and so forth, if you engage with that, if you buy into that concept that we are a diverse people, which that wasn't always the way we were educated, he beautifully represented the Puerto Rican reality as a blending of different cultures. That's not always something that is promoted in this country, all right? This is basically an extension of Europe, the way that I remember being told when I was in school. Through a long struggle now, throughout the school system and within our own communities, we have promoted the idea of we are part of a broader thing. Therefore, alliances with those who agree with you, who have a common vision with you, alliances, coalitions are essential to the success of any movement that wants to challenge oppression and racism. Are examples of that. Police brutality case in Newark, New Jersey, one summer. You know, those hot summers back then, sometimes things got out of hand and we did not have respect from the authorities because they didn't understand the way that we like to celebrate, the way that we like to band our community and so forth. That's a rally in Newark, New Jersey. These, by the way, are all documents and photos and images that we have worked very hard to collect from members over the years. Nobody collects this information for us. We have to do it ourselves. And then we hope to donate it to an institution of higher learning, not clear which one, so that it can be preserved and made as a resource for young people especially, and students who want to do further research on this as an example of an important social movement, social justice organizing. Other examples, a famous campaign to save Hostos Community College in New York City. Just like today in Puerto Rico with the Junta Fiscal and so forth, when they're closing down schools, colleges, right, because of the so-called fiscal crisis, and then Hurricane Irma and Maria come back to back, has devastated the island, right? So you would think that the government should be there right away to help rebuild and provide resources and help us recover. Back then in the 70s, in the case of New York City, as in many urban centers in the 70s, fiscal crisis. So what do? They want to click down. Where can we save money? Where can we make things more efficient? How can we get more with less? All that garbage talk, which is basically you, right? You're going to have to go through a period of austerity. Well, back then we said, we may have to go through some austerity and make some adjustments, but you're not going to shut down the only bilingual college in New York City where so many Puerto Ricans, Dominicanos, Latinos attend. So that was a 2-year struggle. And you know what? Hostos Community College now is one of the most effective and thriving colleges in the entire city university system. This is how that happens. Organizing, fight back.
New York had a financial control board?
Yes, yes.
Emergency Financial Control Board, EFCB, back then in New York City. Today it's La Junta Fiscal,
In Puerto Rico.
FEMA, all of that in Puerto Rico. And, right. So another major campaign was to get the U.S. Navy out of Vieques. These are all images about that.
Which we did do, right?
I love the art.
We got the U.S. Navy out of here. So as Andrés was saying, you know, one of the things that we understood was that we could not work alone, right? We had to build alliances. We had to join with others. And there were other organizations around at that time. within the Puerto Rican left. As Andy had mentioned, there was the Young Lords for a short period of time, but then there were groups like El Comité and many others. And our strategy, our vision was that we had to tear down the curtain of silence around Puerto Rico. And we meant by that we had to let all of North Americans understand that we were a colony of the United States. The United States had a colony, and it was Puerto Rico. And the way that we did that was that we formed these large coalitions and alliances with other left organizations, North American left organizations, African American, Native American. The American Indian movement was a very big part of this. Many other left organizations, and we called for a National Day of Independence and Solidarity with Puerto Rico for October 27th of 1974. This isn't moving. So this was the Day of Solidarity with Puerto Rico in Madison Square Garden. I see you nodding, maybe you were there. But 20,000 people filled the garden in a Day of Solidarity with Puerto Rico. And that was an effort that was combined. We called for that day and formed then a large coalition that formed with the Puerto Rico Solidarity Committee. And that group organized throughout the country. And we basically mobilized all of our members, chapters, affiliates, friends, allies, and very much a large part of the left of the country. And on the West Coast, on that very same day, they also held a Solidarity Day, and this was their poster. The tickets for theirs was $1.50. Ours was $3. You know, it was a little more, but it worked. And so that was the beginning of that campaign around the tearing down of that curtain of silence on Puerto Rico. And then we thought we can't end it with that, because 1976, the United States thought that they were going to celebrate its 200th anniversary of their breaking away of their colonizer, Great Britain. And we said, no, because you have a colony here. You have a colony here. And so we are going to counter that celebration. And we did, through the July 4th Coalition. Again, another mass effort of organizing through that alliance format of bringing together Puerto Ricanos, African Americans, Native Americans, Asian, white left, everyone who understood that we still had a colony, and that was Puerto Rico, and that there were other things that we had to also demand. We wanted freedom for all oppressed nations. We wanted full democracy and equality, and we wanted jobs and a decent standard of living for everyone. Those were our demands, our slogans for that day and for that campaign. And as you see there, 60,000 mobilized and marched in Philadelphia, through the streets, the neighborhoods of Philadelphia, and another 5,000 marched throughout the country in San Francisco, Los Angeles, and Seattle, and New Mexico.
So any movement that rises to challenge the dominant oppressor is going to face pushback and counteraction by the powers that be. Martin Luther King, Black Panthers, all the way through the Native American movement. The Puerto Rican movement has a long history of having been subject to political repression. In the mid-70s, when all of this was happening about the bicentennial mobilization, the FBI and Department of Justice decided to do an intensive analysis. See, we do analyses and they do analyses, counter-analyses, how to stop this from spreading, because it is a threat. And don't forget, way as far back as J. Edgar Hoover and all of that, they said the black community was the #1 danger in America. Well, in Puerto Rico, there had been a long history of nationalist movements, anti-colonial movements going back to the turn of the century and before under Spain. And then, of course, during the 20s and 30s, it hits a peak with the repression of the Nationalist Party, Don Pedro Albizu Campos, and that history. But it continued when, again, the Puerto Rican people began to revitalize its anti-colonial struggle. That's a famous study. It's called Terroristic Activity. Nothing strikes fear into the minds as the word terror. Right? So they use it all the time to strike fear in the hearts of the Puerto Rican community and their friends. Right? And so this was a study to the point where they presented a diagram, an organizational table, right, of what the PSP was structured like. Names of members, right? But this is just one of many examples where a threatened lion, U.S. imperialism, will rear and counterattack using everything that it can. Disruption, infiltration, repression. And of course, the PSP is,
So
most
that's
of the
your
Puerto
name up
Rican
there,
movement was subject to that.
What's your name up there?
That's my name up there, yeah. That's done by the, actually, that's the New York police. No, it's not. That's a FOIA. That's his FOIA. He asked for his Freedom of Information Act, his materials, and in that, it included a meeting that I was actually emceeing on community control in the Williamsburg section of Brooklyn. And so, yeah, they have my name up there, and then all the people who were there. Everybody who attended.
So imagine a meeting to organize community control of the school district in Brunswick. And the FBI felt that it had to be there to see what was going on. It's not just this esoteric thing of independence and freedom and all of that. Down to the nitty-gritty of what these socialistas were doing in the Puerto Rican communities where they were rooted and based, right? Rivera Torres was one of our activists who was called up by the grand jury. They said that she was part of terroristic activities and so forth. At that time, we refused to participate in grand juries, even if what they were investigating had nothing truly to do with us. She spent a couple of months in jail, and we got her out because we had our lawyers and all of that as well. And part of the organizing was not only just around Independencia, but also around struggles, as you saw with the case of the Williamsburg. In every place where we were organized, we tried to get our organization to look for ways to link colonialism in Puerto Rico with the daily issues and problems that our communities faced in New York City, in Philadelphia, Chicago, Massachusetts towns, and so forth. Not always so easy to do, and there is one of the conflicts or tensions, so to speak, of the independence movement. It's always been a challenge to make sure that we're not just mobilizing and organizing around independence, around the political status. Because for a lot of people who are in the daily grind of just surviving, sometimes they say, well, what happens if Puerto Rico becomes independent? Or all those abandoned houses that we see in our towns, around here too? Or is our community going to be somehow bounce back because of the liberation of Puerto Rico? that link is not always so obvious and clear. So here's in the South Bronx, in the worst days of the South Bronx, we, on Charlotte Street, this is now 1980, okay? We once again went back and we mobilized with friends and allies and community organizers who were not members of our organization. You didn't have to be a PSP member to be a great organizer. On the contrary, the best organizers were oftentimes outside of the organization. All we wanted to do was facilitate and help them do their job effectively by providing resources, by offering education and so forth through our study groups and through our newspaper.
Did you have a meeting there?
Yes.
We had a convention there,
Wow.
a people's
Powerful.
convention, very powerful.
Yeah.
I mean, there were hundreds and hundreds. And then on the culmination of this weekend, we organized a mass march down Fifth Avenue to Madison Square Garden once again. Why? Because the Democratic Party was having their 1980 convention. Jimmy Carter was looking to get renominated. He had come a couple of years earlier and said, I'm going to fix this problem of abandonment and arson in the South Bronx and Charlotte Street. When the time came in 1980, the mess was still there and no real investment had taken place.
And that's where the falsas promesas
And
come
there's
in.
the idea of falsas promesas, long before.
The falsas promesas of now in Puerto Rico.
Right.
Mhm.
That's before the, the large turnout of the image there.
So, with all of this organizing and you're wanting to have the capacity to do this work, right? As many of you see in the work that you do here locally, you need money, right? You need money, you need resources. We were not putting out proposals, foundations and that was not part of what we did in those days. We organized in our community and it was our people who supported us. So we formed some of our own businesses, but we also started by getting people to give to the party, donations. And so we had what we called drives to get cotizantes. Cotizantes were people who gave money, maybe every month, maybe a few times in a year. They bought our newspaper Claridad, they came to our events, but that was a way for us to get our community and our membership to support the organization and to give to the organization. We formed something called the Voices of the Third World. That was that was called kind of a speakers bureau, but it was different people, not just members of the PSP, but many different people from, it included sometimes academics, it included someone from the American Indian movement, from the feminist movement of women, basically women of color, and cultural artists. There were groups, different groups. Even Lucecita Benitez, who is a very well-known, for at least some of us, depending on your age, a real national voice for Puerto Rico. She was a part of this, and they went around the country. They came to either to different halls where they could do large concerts. They spoke at universities, they spoke in the community, and that was a way for us to gain some income. We opened a bookstore in New York City on 14th Street, and that operated for several years. We had the newspaper Claridad. Back in 1972, we started our own bilingual supplement because Claridad, which is a paper that continues to exist to this day in Puerto Rico, it is the only independent newspaper in Puerto Rico. And Claridad was our newspaper. That was the paper that we sold on the streets. But we had a bilingual supplement that we started in '72. This is the first edition of it, which featured Lolita Lebron, who had never had an interview or had been seen since she had been in prison. And so that was the first time that someone was able to interview her. So these were, this was part of what we did to be able to make, and to get some monies. But we also tried to have fun. The movement can't all be about, struggle, 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 right? So we did, we did dance, we did have our music, we had our summer outings. We participated in different festivals throughout the country. These were some of the bigger ones that were held in New York and in Central Park and in Brooklyn. There was a big thing called the Atlantic Antic, and we would participate in those. We would do summer outings, our Giras de Verano, which we did every year. And we would bring also, cultural groups there. And it would be a great, day for just all the families and the children and everything to have a good time in the summer. Then we had our annual holiday dance, the Ribeiro dance, which was another big, big fundraiser for us. And so that's the glimpse. That's the glimpse of who we were of that time and some of the things that we did. So before I end, I did want to kind of circle back to where I started, which was with my mother. Because when I joined in '71, I kept talking to her. I never lost my link to my family. And so I would take her the newspaper, and she would read it. And she liked it. My mother had a third-grade education. She came to New York City in the 40s. She was 17 years old. She eloped with my father. She liked the newspaper. Then I started taking her to some of the events. She went to the Madison Square Garden. Wow, big. That was amazing for her. Then I had one of the members start to visit my mother, because that was the way we got our cotizantes. You went to the houses, you talked to people, you met with them. He would meet with her. He'd go there every month. He'd talk to my mother, he'd ask her about her job. He found out that they were trying to organize a union. She was, thinking about that she should get involved in that. She didn't know. Again, she was a woman that had not been used to this kind of thing. But she started giving him her $10, as her contribution. And from there, they went on strike. She slept in St. Patrick's Cathedral overnight with the other people from the nursing home where they were striking. And she became part of that. She saw then that what we were saying about our people being exploited, about what it meant for working class people, for our community, many of whom worked in factories, in low-wage jobs, right? What that meant. They didn't have any benefits. They didn't have time off. These were things that then became a reality for her, and she understood it. And then she understood what we were talking about. And so that became a lesson of someone who first said, "You're crazy, why are you doing this? You've always been so rebellious." But now she understood. Now she understood, and then she herself then said, "Yes, we are a colony, and this is wrong. And so I understand now why you're doing this. You're not doing this because you had to be born in Puerto Rico, but because you understood who you were and what you were grounded in and where you come from." So that's kind of my way of saying that we have to continue to do that, right? We have to continue to talk to the people in our community, to talk to those who sometimes don't understand why it is that people are marching in the streets, right? Like today, all those young people who are out in the street in Washington, D.C. and all over this country, right? Why does that happen? What does that come? Where does that come from? Well, it comes from our realization that things are wrong. Something is wrong, and we, each of us as individuals, can play a part in making change. So we bring you this history. We hope that maybe today you'll support us. We have t-shirts here, a timeless t-shirt, Protesta, Boricua Movement Rising. We are rising. We continue to rise. And we have this book, which was a compilation actually of the movement in general. This is not just a book about the PSP. It's about all of the different organizations that existed during that period. So it includes chapters there from the Young Lords, from El Comité, from different solidarity groups, and so we hope that you'll be interested. We will be leaving copies here with Sabores Poder, so they have it in their collection, and we'll leave one for the library as well. Shortly, we will be publishing our own book, which will be the book on the PSP, and that will be the history of the PSP in the United States. And in addition to that, we're going to be doing a documentary film. So this is just kind of our way of beginning that process. As Andy mentioned earlier, we do have amassed a large archival collection of that history and of our work, which we hope we will be able to put in a place where you and anyone else who's interested in learning more about it.
Do you have a website or an email that we can keep in touch?
Yes, I have here, I have cards.
Make sure you get a card
I
and you
have,
get out the leaflet.
I have this leaflet here if you didn't get it, which gives you a description of this project. We do have a website, but it's a website that is really going to be redone because we put it up, it's boricuamovement.com. We put it up very early on when we started this project, and we thought we were maybe going to do an exhibit, like a gallery exhibit, and then that all changed. So it's not really as as up to date, but you have my email address there if you want to keep in touch, which I would welcome. I would welcome it. So thank you, and. I think now we really, our interest is more hearing about you, what's happening here in Holyoke, in Springfield, and questions that you may have. Yes?
So, first of all, thank you for sharing this history. I'm a city councilor here. I was formerly homeless, I went through it. I'm HIV positive, so Holyoke, I'm from Waterbury, Connecticut, first of all, so you say Waterbury, I got really happy. And I used to door knock with Hector Llano, who was a Boricua, who used to say he was a part of the Socialist movement in Waterbury. And he used to teach me how to door knock, and we used to go register Boricuas to vote when I was little with my grandmother. But for me as a Boricua here, I hear the story, I almost wish that the party was still alive, or that you guys could come back, because what happens is and we had the conversation with the Young Lords before too, it was there, all of these supports now nationwide are gone. And here, even me as a Boricua city councilor, they just ran an article that I'm saying I'm protesting the St. Patrick's Day parade here until more white electeds show up at the Puerto Rican Day parade here in Holyoke, because they don't come out. But my question to you is why did all of these end? Why did you guys feel that you had to end? And I know you guys are going around sharing the history, but is there any conversations from all of what I call the OGs, right? My dad and mom are from Brooklyn. All the OGs, you guys are still around, and thank you for sharing the knowledge, but we need that. As a younger, I just turned 30, as a younger Boricua, I want a national movement, and we've been connecting with the Puerto Rican Cultural Center Chicago a lot. So, Jose Lopez, and we brought Oscar out here. They call me a terrorist now because we had Oscar here. We celebrated him as a community. But why did you guys end? And is there any passion? I was thinking 2024 is the 50th anniversary of the meeting. You guys should do another meeting at Madison Square Garden. Have young people come together, just an anniversary or reunion, because things haven't gotten better. It's almost cyclical. We did a lot of movement. I know you guys have done a lot, so thank you so much. But the stuff here in Holyoke for Boricuas is still the same. I represent the neighborhood that has the highest unemployment rate, 45%. The annual income for South Holyoke is $14,300. And nothing has changed, to some degree. So we did do movement, but then it's then at some point all these things went away. And so if you could just shed some light, and thank you for all that you've done for us, and this history is important to me, because now when I'm fighting, I took pictures of every slide. So I was like, oh my God, I can't wait to start saying that or start using that. But and I'm the executive director of Nueva Esperanza, so like we've come back, we fought, we're talking about Carlos Vega, and we want to bring all this stuff to here, and I'm really proud and thankful to Manuel and Juan Falcon. They're the OGs here, and Jose Bo, who kicked me out of his restaurant, and that's why I, as a young Boricua who didn't know any history about my people, that guy back there kicked me out of his restaurant and threw a Sol Latino in my face and said, you have to learn your history, because how are you Boricua in this country and you don't even know who Oscar Lopez is, or you don't know who Pedro Albizu Campo is. And so I'm grateful to these OGs and you guys, but if you could just share that light, that'd be great.
To be fair, they don't know who they are in Puerto Rico either.
Nope.
To be fair, in Puerto Rico, we get 10 years of American history taught in school, 1 year of European history, and maybe 6 months of Puerto Rican history taught in school. I'm talking grade school through high school. I only started learning about actual Puerto Rican heritage when I was over 25, and I'm your age, so it hasn't been that long. And the resources aren't there. It's not taught in school. There's a lot of disconnect. There's no one in Puerto Rico saying this is who this is.
So yes, I know that you had recently Iris Morales come out
Yes.
from the Young Lords, and Iris and us, along with some other compañeros and compañeras from el comité, we've actually started coming together, and are looking at ways in which we can share that history together collectively. So we're doing this kind of thing as well with the 3 representatives from those 3 groups coming out to different places and doing this. I'll give a little bit, maybe Andy will add some. As many things happen when you have this convergence, large convergence of groups with many different people. We went through, as you saw, we went through MPI, which was like a larger kind of broad coalition type thing, then became a Marxist-Leninist party with, that proclaimed that independence had to be combined with socialism as well. That was a moving into looking at that it was the working class who really had to be the leading force in gaining independence for Puerto Rico. That was a theory and an ideology and a way of thinking that was amassed and brought together many different people, but not everyone. Not everyone believed in that. And the PSP went through these periods of intensive, more internal debates around what was more important. Do you organize the working class? Do you do more base organizing? Do you organize in communities, in the workplace? Or do you focus more on just independence and the status and looking at the status question as a key element? And how do you do that? That began to wear away the unification of the party and created some splits, and people left. People left the organization, leaders left. Different people got kind of disillusioned with all that debate and everything, and so it tore away a bit at the fabric of the organization. We here in the United States, those 2 big mobilizations took a lot out of people. That was not an easy thing to do. That is not an easy thing to do. You're going through months and months, days and days, day and night, going to people, organizing, telling them, you have to come, this is why it's important, this is what we want, that was very, very intense. And we were not just doing it in our own community. For example, I was leading the New York July 4th coalition. That was not lo puertorriqueño. I was there with the left, all right? So in many ways I felt like, wait a minute, am I organizing the left of this country, or am I organizing in our community? It's, it wears you out. Just like you all know the word burnout, people get burned out, so that created somewhat of a tension for us here. Were we just doing work around Puerto Rico's independence, or were we fighting to organize in our communities to better the conditions of the Puerto Ricanos here in the United States. Because the fact of the matter is, as we see here in this room, and as we look around the country where Puerto Ricans are, many of us are gonna be here. We're gonna stay here. This is where we're gonna be, because we've built roots here. We still understand who we are and our identity, but we're here. So that became another tension for us. You know, where do you put your focus? Where do you put the emphasis? Where do you put your energies? And that also then, you know, made for people to kind of move away, all right? I don't know if you have any other to add to that?
I'll just take one bite at this huge question. It's a challenging question, right? And this will be maybe a little more too philosophical, okay? But I think it's essential that we understand that if we come from a people, and again, broadening it out, not just to Puerto Ricanos, but to other groups of our population, let's say just here in the U.S., that are, you know, struggling. And now it's, you know, practically the entire U.S. working class. Anybody who has a regular job, right, is struggling. Students who are graduating with all those loans and everything, they're going to be indentured servants for the first 10, 15 years of their lives, just working to pay off, right? The checks get garnished if they fall behind. What is happening is just atrocious, right? So, big, you know, we just have an instinct within ourselves. If you're a thinking human being, we got to do something about this. We've got to fight back. We have to, in the most creative ways and in the ways that you feel most comfortable and most skilled. Maybe forming a new PSP or forming a new even Puerto Rican national movement that is beyond just trying to get people elected, which now, in the old days, we were very skeptical about electoral politics. Even though towards the end, the PSP got into it a little more and more. Right now, I say, if you're not going to vote this November, if you're not going to find out who it is that you got to get elected this November, we can't talk. You don't have the right, and I'm being arrogant here, all right, to complain about what is messed up in our communities. No. Get off your ass and get out there, do what it takes to vote. Offer yourself up as a candidate. Find out who's good out there. That's how basic we are now, in a way. But let me tell you, I think there's going to be major change come November. There's a real possibility, okay? But you got to think, all right? Then comes the tougher questions. Well, do we vote for the Democrat, which is usually the lesser of two evils, or do we form another force, another party, all that sort of stuff, okay? Those are very valid, important discussions, okay? And so, but put your head in that framework, okay? And I would also add, many of our good people, okay? Not just the ones who were activists back then, but their descendants, so to speak, the political descendants, the young activists of today, or the young people here today, whether they be millennials or, you know, middle-aged people, they work in very important places. They work in social service agencies, in the non-profits. They work for a union, right? They have a regular job, okay, where they're in contact with other people. You, right, we, okay, have to all think of what political impact we can have in our daily lives, and just get out there a little more and try to network out so that your sphere of influence, okay, is such that you are in touch with people. And this is my rant about social media. Social media, very powerful, but don't make it let you get lazy about personal contact with other human beings. There's nothing like personal contact with the people that you wish to share knowledge with, to influence, and so forth. So those are just two ideas.
Yes, I wanted to say something real quick, that the Democrats and Republicans have both participated in the colonization of Puerto Rico. So for us to be supporting the Democratic Party Something else has to happen.
Well,
Not
yeah.
that.
Can I
That's-
interrupt about actual voting? I feel,
Let me just go to these two and then you can, is that all right?
oh, it's not a
Because it-
question.
Oh, it's not, okay, you want
It's
to make a
it's an
statement?
addition.
Okay.
I feel it's our responsibility as Puerto Ricans living in the US to vote. It's an actual social responsibility because Puerto Rico doesn't have the voice or the vote. Living here, we have that privilege. It's not a right that's afforded to everyone. And it's a social responsibility for us to take that into our hands and to be informed and to be out there voting.
Okay. Yes, and then
Thank you.
the woman behind you?
Thank you, Nelson. That was an amazing question. Thank you, Manuel, for bringing this figure for people. I'm Manny Pintado. I'm a member of Western Mass Boricuas for the Liberation of Puerto Rico and also with Chapter Justice. I have two of my cameras over there, Jorge and Mildred. We have over here Jose Bo, he was the big leader here for me. And my question is more about counter-pro. It's about the FBI. It's about everything that they did to put all the subversive groups, like the Black Panthers, the Young Lords, the Black Rebel Movement, and it's because they had all these carpetas. I mean, right now we are reading that wonderful book of Nelson Dennis, The War Against All Puerto Ricans. I want everybody to tell you, you are Puerto Rican or you are friends, read that book. That book is amazing. It's just perfect. As a matter of fact, we're having right now, tenemos un grupo que estamos leyendo este libro porque, bueno, yo me crié en Buenos Aires, Argentina, pero mi papá era de Puerto Rico, de Ponce. So yo tengo la, ¿sabes? Pero como le estaba diciendo, este es un libro completamente que yo quisiera que esté en los high schools y voy a hacer todo lo posible para que este libro lo lleven a los high schools y vengan a los colegios. Entonces mi pregunta es, por ejemplo, lo que pasó en mayo, el año pasado, cuando el May Day, que hubieron muchos infiltrados que se metieron en la marcha de la UPR, que fueron los encapuchados. Entonces yo estoy diciendo, eso también pasó mucho con los grupos. Entonces, ¿cómo podríamos hacer nosotros para poder parar estos infiltrados del FBI, estos infiltrados que se meten, los chotas? ¿Cómo es que nosotros podemos? Porque queremos organizar, queremos enseñar, porque lo que nosotros estamos haciendo es activate, organize and educate. Y yo vine ahora de la marcha que estuve en Orlando con los estudiantes, ¿ok? So, yo les digo sinceramente del corazón, yo quiero trabajar con esto, pero tiene que haber una manera de poder, no pelear contra el FBI, pero una manera de poder contrarrestar lo que ellos están haciendo con nosotros. Si ustedes tienen unas ideas, por favor, díganme, porque quisiéramos saber.
El dilema de, nosotros teníamos un dicho que decía, evitar, por la cuestión de la represión, evitar la mentalidad de encerrarse demasiado. Entonces uno queda en una organización que es abierto al enemigo porque uno está cerrado al pueblo. You want to fight repression and all of that, you have to have massivity. From massivity comes quality de los militantes de la organización. Okay? The key to that, one of the keys is educación interna de los participantes, which is why if you have a study group, that's the perfect place, that's the necessary place to begin. Because through education, what we used to call educación política funcional, through education, but it means meeting once a week. It means getting together in somebody's apartment or house, right, to discuss, right, materials. And you all decide what it is you're going to discuss. Because el enemigo no quiere invertir mucho tiempo en un infiltrator sitting in study groups. No, they want to be, who's the leader, who is right for a scandal, all right? ¿Cómo podemos fomentar la división por vía del chisme, all right? And so then when you're in a study group and you're with a core group of good people, that this is part of leadership development. all right? Then you're starting to pick out who are the people that behave weirdly, right? Who are the people that always seem to be complaining about so-and-so achievement, right? Or why don't we go down to the police precinct at night and start throwing some rocks over there, all right? If your organization decides that's what they should do because the community is going to back you up, okay? Maybe that's a legitimate tactic, okay? But not because somebody, right, tirando ideas solamente para provocar y para dividir a la gente. That's just an example.
Yo estoy muy de acuerdo con usted que la educación es bien importante. Yo nací y me crié en Puerto Rico y empecé a militar con el Partido Independentista cuando estaba en la escuela, lo cual mis papás que eran del Partido Progresista y del Partido Popular estaban bien enojados, pero yo dije, no, yo me tengo que educar. Empiezo a trabajar con el Partido Independentista y entendía que tenía un vacío. Entonces ahí conozco un grupo de compañeros porque vivía en Guaynabo, entre ellos Carlos Muñoz Varela, que fue brutalmente asesinado por el exilio cubano, aunque él era cubano, pero él creía firmemente en la independencia de Puerto Rico. Entonces, me daba mucho coraje porque aún estando en la escuela, no en la universidad, empiezo a militar con estos grupos y el afán de ellos era verdaderamente capacitarte, porque cuando estás en la escuela no te educan en términos de la cultura, en términos de tu historia, pero cuando empiezo a militar con el movimiento socialista puertorriqueño, conociendo a Carlos Muñoz Varela y otros compañeros, ahí entonces empiezo a educarme y a conocer de mi cultura y saber de mi historia realmente, y digo, wow, entonces tienden a tildarte de comunista porque te estás educando. Ya cuando empiezo en la universidad, bueno, antes de la universidad empezamos a trabajar con la independencia de Namibia y a trabajar con unos grupos de movimientos en Puerto Rico. Y ahí pues, obviamente eso me ha perseguido, aún no estando en la universidad, pienso que estoy en la carpeta negra, no puedo buscar la carpeta, pienso que estoy en la carpeta negra, pero fue bien importante para mí esa educación política que tuve, porque conozco mi historia, conozco la historia y olvídate, sé que en cualquier foro que me pare, digo, espérate un momentito, esto que se está dando es porque es debido a esto, pero el Departamento de Educación controla totalmente la educación en Puerto Rico. Ellos te enseñan lo que ellos quieren que tú sepas, ellos no te enseñan la verdadera historia, porque una vez te enseñan la verdadera historia, sales del enajenamiento y entonces abres los ojos y empiezas a luchar por la independencia. Básicamente esa es mi historia y
Gracias. ¿Alguna? Yes, you had a...
Oh, I was just going to say, I actually was in Philadelphia for the July 4th coalition. We were organizing in Philadelphia.
Okay.
And but I was responding to the question of what happens with the movements. And I just wanted to say, too, that from '74 until now, when it was a long period of incredible oppression and repression from the government, and definitely intentional, because of the 60s and the movements and all of the things going on. And so, you know, it's been very, just wanted to say that it's been very difficult to sustain any kind of resistance. And the other thing I would ask you to comment more on is that right now I'm a member of an International Socialist Organization, ISO, and I am fairly new, well, I'm going on a year now, but a new member, but I still feel, I would like you to comment, if you would, on the difference between, well, not difference, but movement, you mentioned it earlier, movement versus a party, or not versus, but the idea of a party. I still believe that, I'm beginning to believe that I think we need, you know, in order to sustain what we're talking about, we need a party, and not, you know, some kind of elite, I don't mean it in any way like that, an elite group who can tell the masses of people how to have a revolution, but it has to come from the bottom up and from people and whatever oppressed group you're talking about, and as you said, alliances. I don't want to, right, so in my darker moments I think, you know, yeah, right, you know, it's this dream that I have that, you know, I've probably never lived to see. But I'm wondering what your comments are on that.
Well, the difference at that point between what was the MPI and then changing into the PSP was that the MPI was it was a coming together of people with different ideologies, different ways of thinking. But what unified them was that they wanted independence of Puerto Rico. That was the common ground. That was the common denominator for them. So there were people there from the Nationalist Party, as I said. There were people there from the Communist Party. There were people there from the Puerto Rican Independence Party. There were people who were unaffiliated with any grouping, but who wanted independence for Puerto Rico. And so they came together, and that organization existed for many years. But then within that, there were those who felt we need something that's more clearly identified with the working class. And that was what then brought the change to then creating this political party. And it was a party that was formed out of an ideology that followed Marxism, right? And so that in itself, a Marxist-Leninist party, in its definition then, delineates how you're going to organize. And it's very centralized. It was very much top-down in terms of leadership, all right? Something which now, for myself, I don't think that that's the best way to do it. I don't believe that that's the best way to organize. I do believe in bottom-up organizing and development, and not such a centralized, controlled form of leadership. I do believe that you do need a leadership body. You do need bodies that can coordinate and that do things and that are leading in charge of things, because otherwise you'd have an anarchistic kind of party, right?
Or you'd have it, fizzle out. If you have a strong movement, like the 60s. I mean, you had an incredibly strong movement, but to sustain it and to keep it going, keep it organized.
Right. And so now we see that there are many different movements. There are different social justice movements percolating throughout the United States. And oftentimes, even of our own children, they will say, I need an anchor. I feel like I don't have a place. I'm in all of these things and everything is in silos, and I do need a place, which is, I think, what Nelson was talking about. You kind of feel like there has to be something then that brings all of that together. And for that to happen, it takes time. It takes the time, and it takes the right moments for different groups to kind of see that working together, they can do a lot more. And out of that can maybe come something that becomes more solidified and joins them all together. What that will be, I can't tell you. I'm not, that's kind of like not why I'm here to tell you what that's going to be. But I do certainly support the fact that there are many of these different movements that are coming up, and that they are bubbling up and building up from young people, and that people are saying that they are part of a resistance.
Yeah.
That's important, using that word, part of the resistance, and they understand what they are resisting, what it is that they don't like, what they're seeing, and they're allowing themselves to march together with others who have other definitions of that resistance, right? So when we have these very massive kind of demonstrations, I can be marching there with somebody who has never been even in a demonstration before. And this is for the first time, and they're seeing this, and they're hearing people talking about, so many different things, right? That they're against racism, that they're against homophobia, that they're against, Islamophobia, that, what does that mean? And, why are we here? But we're all together, and we don't seem to be fighting for very much of the same thing. We want a better life, right, for everyone. So, that at some point, we will see that there will be this coming together, perhaps today's march, perhaps the things that have been happening with Black Lives Matter, perhaps the things that came out of that women's march. If those organizers and those different groups begin to talk with one another, begin to work with one another, you know, my hope is that we then see something that does bubble up from that. And we can form some of the counters then to the Democratic and Republican politicians that come forward, right?
Thank you.
Yes.
Oh, just about like where the political movements went. Like I heard Noam Chomsky speak a few years ago at UMass, and he said, and it resonated with me, is that the effectiveness of the civil rights movement and the anti-war movement was so threatening to the capitalists that they manipulated the market so that your housing costs increased. So, and the reason that we pay more than anyone else in the first world for a college education are not by mistake. And I can say I graduated in 1984 from high school, and I dropped out of college by 1986. And yeah, you did, in New Hampshire, you did need 2 weeks worth of pay to pay your rent. But I had friends 10 years older who were saying, like, I worked a part-time job in the 1970s and paid my rent, like working 20 hours a week. And by 1986, you needed to, you know, if you're an entry-level worker. And do you feel like that had an effect? I mean,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I graduated college in 1971. And I left, and I lived with my friend in a $125 rent apartment, and we survived. You know, my son lives in a similar apartment now, and he's paying almost $2,000 in the Bronx.
so it's hard for him to walk away from his job.
He can't even afford it. He can't afford that. So, you know, so what do you do? What do you do with this, right? Yeah, and that is what happened. And what happened in the 80s, you know, Reaganism, right? You know, there was a real push. There was a real push to the right in this country to counter everything that had been happening.
Can I ask you one more thing? Have you heard about like for me, I didn't do well economically, so like, I'm really poor, and like the resurgence of the MLK movement, the Poor People's Movement that's coming out of those Moral Mondays in North Carolina, is like makes me happier than anything I've ever heard of, but it's not building steam very quickly, you know what I mean? I think it, you know, they've hired people in every state, I think, and they're going out to connect with folks, but that seems like a good plan for me, like, just the
You do have to think that this is all long-term, you know, and that's difficult, you know. I feel that we did a lot. You know, we had a lot of successes. You know, we were able to have, you know, great impact on many, many different fronts, even just in the fact that we claimed and affirmed our identity as a people and who we were, and that we were able to even say and recognize that we were a colony. You know, that in itself is huge. And we did other big things, like keeping a college open, like creating certain institutions, you know, like building levels of leadership, many, many different things. But we didn't get independence. Now, that has not disillusioned me. I wish we had. We hadn't, and we're still fighting for it, and we're still fighting for better conditions here in this country. But it's long term. It's, you know, we have to see it as for the long term, right? Yeah.
I'm also in Western Mass Boricuas, like Manny mentioned. My name is Millie, and I went to a conference at SUNY on rebuilding Puerto Rico, and they tricked a lot of us into going into this to see the speaker. Basically, the speaker was saying decolonize Puerto Rico, but basically he was a statehooder. It was run by statehooders. So I thought that was really, the first thing they did when we walked in was asked, how many people are for the independence of Puerto Rico? So everybody in the room raised their hand, everybody. And the second thing they said, well, we're not going to talk about that because we're going to rebuild Puerto Rico, but we don't need to talk about that. And it didn't make sense. We all protested. Eventually, the speaker, little by little, went and started to sit down, and because we were all, you know, we spoke out.
Where was this in New York City?
In SUNY College. The conference was called Rebuilding Puerto Rico.
What city was it, the conference in?
The conference was in the city.
In New York.
In New
New
York.
York City, that's CUNY.
That's
CUNY.
CUNY.
CUNY
Right.
is
It
what
was
I
at the
said.
Center
What
for
I
Puerto
said
Rican
SUNY,
Studies.
it's CUNY. Sorry.
At
Yeah.
Hunter College Center
Yes,
for
Hunter
Puerto-
College,
I
yes.
was there too, who knows, we could have been sitting next to each other. Right. That's one of the problems, yeah,
I
right.
was,
So
like,
there's
shocked.
there's an element that wants to separate the political
Wow.
status, right, from the recovery and all of that.
There can't be
there
any
are ways to
recovery
deal with
without
that.
independence for Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
It's what's causing this issue, the fact that we're colonized.
She had her hand up here, and then,
Yes, sorry, what she said was so shocking to me, I forgot my question. But there is,
So they're using
that-
the word decolonization. They're saying decolonize, but they want statehood, so we have to be very careful when we're dealing with these statehooders.
just reminded me. So, how do you feel versus the 70s when the group was very active? How do you feel now the independence movement has grown? Has it expanded? Has it shrunk? How do you feel it compares today versus at that time?
another big question. We are in the grand irony is that we are in our moment, Puerto Rico is, of definition of survival as a nationality, as an ethnicity even, okay? And our response to that, the Puerto Rican movement, the historic independence movement, is not up yet to the task of responding, okay? But there are a lot of social movement organizations in La Isla and here in the diaspora who are doing a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of the response, in terms of the, organizing humanitarian care and all of that, okay? Now, many of them aren't yet saying, I'm an independentista, that's why I'm doing this, all right? They're saying, I can't stand the way our people are getting screwed over. And most of them are anti-capitalist, but yet the link with the political status issue is not necessarily clear, okay? And I think that's the problem of the independence movement, okay? We have not yet figured out ways, all right, to get the message to the next generations, okay? So, part of the issue is, every generation has its own responses to the crises of their time. So we, okay, the so-called OGs, the elders, right, can offer you historical perspective to this uprising that is definitely happening. The rising is happening, okay, in Puerto Rico, throughout American cities and all of that. It's not yet articulated in a way that kind of resonates with us, okay, because we had a clear framework, okay? Ultimately, it wasn't an appropriate framework, to tell you the truth. Marxism-Leninism, my personal opinion, okay, we're speaking differently, had its flaws that in the time revealed that we weren't exactly coming across with ways and thinking about how to organize the response, all right? So it's ironic because the disaster, the crisis, is of monumental proportions, and we're famous for exaggerating, okay? Los viejos nosotros, we're famous for exaggerating la crisis de la dependencia, all of that. But this, I'm sorry to say, is a major crisis, right, in Puerto Rico. It is true, right? So the response to that, there will be, right? It's been a slow response. Still, I just saw a review, a poll in Nuevo Dia, saying that the there's a small encuesta, there's 1,000 people, right? They give pretty high marks to Rosselló, to Ricky, for the way he's handling. Now, they don't give high marks. They give very low marks to Orangehead, right? So what's going on there? Because Ricky is with Orangehead.
After Thursday, they changed their minds, don't worry.
After Thursday? Okay.
Don't worry about it.
Good.
They've all changed their minds, don't worry about it.
So, good, yeah. So anyway, the conditions, we used to say, the objective conditions are there for a revolutionary or for an anti-capitalist response. The organization is not there. The organization of the masses.
Wouldn't you say that's by design, though?
But
It's boiling,
we
right?
can't control
Yes.
what they're going to do. In other words, we cannot say, oh, that's not fair. Imperialism, look what we're up against.
Yeah.
It's the worst power. Don't waste too much time on that, right? Don't waste too much time on repression, okay? Because we have to do what we are capable of doing. Because that's what we have control over. That's what we have. The peace is organizing our response, those various things, a lot of things, right, that we have control over. A major problem with the independence movement, we have a ridiculous level of silos. Too many organizations, too many leaders. We have a historic problem in all of Latin America con el líder, and it's usually líder, el líder máximo. Tremendous, oratory, all of that stuff, and the people get lazy. We allow ourselves to be moved by that. And instead of, it's all on us individually. It's all on us individually to say, okay, let's get together and do something for next month, okay? And I'm going to put my ego outside the door. And I'm going to ask you to please, right, put your agenda to the side. Don't impose. This is not a competition for me to grow at your expense, right? My organization to grow at your expense, all right? And this is what I think is happening. We talk about this a lot. I think we're seeing some of that positive approach among the younger generation of today. I sometimes look and I say, hope they don't burn themselves out. The other irony in our movement was, we used to say, la revolución está a vuelta de la esquina, right? The revolution is around the corner because there was revolution, anti-imperialist struggle throughout the world, throughout the third world, right? People were making progress there. They were taking charge and so forth, right? So we thought that was a natural thing that was going to happen in Puerto Rico. What happens if you think the revolution is around the corner, maybe a couple of years, as I was told? No, esto está montado para 2 años. Who was I to say, right? I was 26 years old and I didn't know, okay? So what do you do if you think that that's the situation? You drop your job, you leave your family and your kids, you work 24 hours a day, y eso te lleva 2 años before you burn out. And that's what happened with a lot of our efforts. You've got to pace, like it's often said, you got to take self-care. This is the long haul, right? And to endure the long haul, you need to have a framework and a mind, okay, that prepares you for the ups and downs, the peaks and valleys. And I hope that that can happen among the generation now that has to be taking lead of the struggle of today. Because in another decade, we can't even come all the way out to Holyoke. Talk like this, right?
She has her hand up and then, okay, yes.
I just had a question primarily for you. What was it like as a woman, as part of the movement? Were there many women? And seeing that most of the leaders are male, what was your experience?
Yeah. I write about that actually there. We had to struggle with el machismo, but there were many women in the organization. The first group of leaders, though, that came up when we formed the U.S. branch, there was only one woman. But I would say probably 2 to 3 years into it, that started to change. And so there were more women who were coming up into the leadership bodies of of the organization. But, you know, we had formed an organization. Many of us were second generation Puerto Ricanos, and we came from very traditional families. And so many of the older you know, people who were in the organization, because the PSP was very multi-generational. It was from high school students who came in to people who were already in their 60s, 70s, who had been in struggles for a very long time. And so those, you know, that configuration caused many tensions. There were, you know, men in the party who really did not include their wives in the organization, even though their wives believed in the struggle and wanted to be a part of it, but they were not brought in to be active members. In other instances, it was difficult for some men to follow the leadership of women. And so I faced that as a woman leader in the organization. You know, when men basically would, you know, would skirt around you, you know? They do things to work around you. And so, you know, we confronted that in different ways. We confronted it through our ways of doing what we called criticism, la crítica y la autocrítica, right? Criticism and self-criticism, which we would do in evaluating our work and in the way we were working with one another. We would do it through we formed the Women's Commission, which then did study circles which just discussed the whole issue of sexism. And you know, from its global perspective, we were not the only group that suffered machismo. And so we did that as a way to counter. We participated with other women in other feminist, you know, groupings, and that was, you know, that was what we did, but we weren't always as successful with it, and I think that was one of the limitations of the organization as a whole, you know, from Puerto Rico to the United States. In Puerto Rico, and the way that I saw it, it was a much more overt kind of expression of sexism, you know. I mean, they're the leaders, they were, you know, los caudillistas, the ones that were, you know, the male leader, bringing up issues around feminism and women's struggles was something that was, you know, said, you know, we can't deal with that now, that's, you know, that's secondary, that's tertiary, we have to deal with, you know, the struggle for independence and whatever. And here in the United States, I always used to say that it was a more covert way of expressing it. Because the movement, the women's liberation movement, was so much more of a force here. It was much broader, and the movements of then, what we would then call ourselves third world women, was really beginning to rise up. And so there was kind of the male not wanting to show that they were too chauvinistic, because, you know, they had to then face this much more massive group of women. So it was an interesting dynamic, but one that we did face, and we struggled with. And we struggled with it to this day. But I have to say that I am very heartened with seeing that there are so many more women leaders that are rising up in many of the movements that I see, you know, coming up. And I think that's important.
Thank you.
Nelson, you had?
I just want to share, like, locally, like, you're talking about independence movements, like, here locally, like I said, I know Wishmas, you know, Boricuas for the Liberation of Puerto Rico, they do an amazing job, but just even from an institutional standpoint, Nueva Esperanza existed for all these years as a nonprofit. It didn't even call out, like, who we really were, what we were doing, and so, like, it was like 5 or 6 years back, we say Manuel Frau saved Nueva Esperanza because it almost got taken over as an institution by another community development corp, whose ED drinks out of Ronald Reagan mug, just to give you an example. And so, like, that's who was going to take us over, and he wrote a letter to the editor basically blasting it, and I used that then as the tool to stop the merger, which was awesome. But just to give you local context of what's going on locally for local movements, we're having these discussions now for the first time ever, where before, right, the OGs sometimes were gatekeepers. And so like the neighborhood that I represent now as city councilor, I was homeless. I ran because I was just tired of hearing from someone who looked like me, who represented the neighborhood for 20 years. Nothing changed, nothing happened, and we had someone there who fought against the system as best he could. But now we have 4 Latinos on the city council. We're actually starting to push on the council out of 13 some of these more, so from a political standpoint, you're right, we do need more localized Latinos, because when I say stuff on the council, like when the council attacks me for being a renter, I don't own a home, I can't afford to own a home, and my little ED salary isn't a lot, but from the political standpoint of Holyoke, we are moving it on a political front. My first day in office, we created
excuse me, for being a renter?
Yeah, they only wanted to allow homeowners only to speak at the podium.
He's not a taxpayer.
So I'm not a taxpayer because I rent. So those are the things that I deal with, but then, but they changed. People showed up, people talked out. My colleague Josie Valentin, who's a badass lesbian counselor as well, and we're seeing alignment with these movements, the LGBT movement, all of us are coming together. We passed the Puerto Rican Cultural District here in Holyoke, which I had to fight because they were like, oh, you're not including the French Canadian or the German or the Irish. And I'm saying, that's wonderful, they did great. But now the largest diaspora living here are the Puerto Ricans. So we need to recognize that. And like I said, with this whole parade stuff, but even Nueva, we've changed our mission. The board of directors run by powerful Latina women. All of the executive team are Latina women. We have LGBT Boricuas on the board. They changed their mission statement. So now we exist to be a catalyst and a partner for a vibrant, sustainable, and powerful Puerto Rican Afro-Caribbean community of Holyoke. And so we just called that out in our mission statement. That's really changed the work that I'm doing. So we have a men of color group that meets every other Sunday. So any men in the room are meeting this Sunday. We're focusing on breaking down machismo within the men of color in Holyoke and in Western Mass. We talk about machismo, homophobia. We had this huge conversation around consent. This weekend we're talking about capitalism, race, imperialism, what do they mean? To do those study groups, we have a women of color group, Con las Luchadoras. They meet every other week as well, but they lead the conversation of what we need to do. And we started a youth summer program, a social justice camp for kids. We piloted last year called Cuyo. The kids learned the decolonized history of Christopher Columbus, so much so that one of the girls who was a first grader went back to school this year. She got in trouble by her Italian teacher for saying Columbus was a genocidal maniac and that he killed 350,000 Taínos. So there is movements happening locally, and a good model for us to even look at, right? On the national level, Western Mass has been joining forces with Chicago and New York, and we've been to some of those convenings on a political standpoint too. But Jose Lopez, who I consider my mentor, my guru, and now Oscar, we speak all the time, they try to start the whole national Puerto Rican agenda, and now it's going to dissolve and come into something different because they realized exactly that. This national thing was too big, but they want to form like local chapters, like a little city chapter. But the Connecticut Puerto Rican agenda, it's a good model for anyone to look at. They are pushing, my young friend Jason Ortiz, if you look at him, they're doing amazing work in Connecticut around, they just did a day of action at the State House. They pushed Senators Blumenthal and Murphy before our senators here got on the whole FEMA not doing disbursement stuff. The Connecticut Puerto Rican agenda, they have localized chapters. They're really killing it as far as independent stuff. So just, I know you guys are listening to look at some context, but also to give people here locally stuff. They're gonna form something new, we're looking into it. And at Nueva too, I love the fact that my board allows me to say that I'm a new age independista. Like for me, that's the only framework I could do the work at Nueva, and the board supports me in that. And the difference for me, like you were saying, is around the funding. So no longer am I we're not going for national grants and stuff like that. We're trying to create programs that are self-sustaining, that people might be able to donate to, like the summer camp. If the parent can't pay money, they'll bring the snacks for the after school. They'll cook the lunch. We go to the soup kitchen to eat lunch 2-3 days of the week. Or for breakfast, you see the Boricua moms coming in with the desayuno every morning. So we really are creating new models. So just to share with you guys locally, we're trying to be that center. Like, Jose, I know he's not even here anymore. But even him at El Mercado, you guys, I know we're going to go after the eat there. But we're converting that space now to from just a hall to the Puerto Rican Afro-Caribbean Cultural Center. So we could do talleres, we could do these things, and anytime Maria here and Bo here with these talks, Nelson Dennis was here, we're trying to pack this room out, like by door knocking and stuff like that. And so even in Nueva, we shifted back to the people, like you said, back to the doors. Because when voter turnout's only 20% in my ward and 90% for Ward 7, but when I go knock on those Latinos Boricuas doors, yo no te creo, mijo, porque nadie han cambiado en este área. But now they just saw parking lines painted and park streets getting redone, and they're like, okay, vamos a volvernos, let's get involved. So all politics are local, and we're pushing those things. But I just want to share, anyone wants to get involved, because the truth is, we are spending out. Like, we just brought Saida Pinto, who is this indigenous circle process leader, to teach us how to do indigenous circle-led processes as a form of communication that's not a top-down model.
They were just doing one outside from here when I walked in.
Yeah, so she came, we trained 25 people from the community, and it was a beautiful thing, and now we're gonna start doing community circles. Just, hey, how do we talk? And me as a man of color, all of my women, all of the staff who are top level are all Boricua women of color. Because for me, Nueva's only been run by men of color. My goal, right, is if I move up or on, or heaven forbid, I pass away, que una Latina, una Boricua takes over Nueva Esperanza. So we're trying on a very localized level to push these things. I'm looking to be along as part of something bigger, so that's why I was asking what's next on a bigger level. But I just want to share with the room, if you want to get involved, Nueva Esperanza, we're always looking for stuff. And Manuel helped even me start a theater company, because we realized in the arts, all the arts in this area are white, or they're from the 5 colleges, right? Or all of the independent movement has moved to educational institutions, and it's not on the main level for the people to enjoy anymore. So we do Palante Theater Company. We create a pop-up black box theater. Last year we brought Urban Theater Company of Chicago, did the show La Gringa, and this year we have Pregones is coming with Dancing on My Cucaracha Killers. But we make it affordable. Kids from the schools get to watch the dress rehearsals for free. And if you're one of the viejitas from the senior towers, they get to come in no cost, because we want to connect the arts and trying to overlap and align these works. So I just wanted to share with you guys what's going on locally. Oh, and do you accept cards for your, I want to buy, do you accept cards, or it's just cash only?
Yeah, it's, today it's just, cash.
I'll call my partner, I'll run home,
But-
we'll get it.
But, yeah.
I need to support you, okay.
So-
Sorry.
No traje ni mi cheque.
Sí, chequera, sí.
You want to keep it in your archive. right?
Chequera, sí.
Yeah, that's the same thing I'm trying to do. So I would-
Yeah, I haven't gotten that square thing that I have to get to.
Seguramente la presto. Seguro. Yo soy otro más boricua.
I just wanted to say, mi nombre es Juan Falcón, and I'm actually from Springfield, and I love supporting Holyoke as well as members of Holyoke when
But
we're
you were
doing.
born in the Bronx.
Huh? But I was actually raised in the Bronx, born in Puerto Rico, raised in the Bronx. I did attend Hunter and John Jay, and he finished my education there. I finished it up in Cambridge. But I just watched a documentary, Luis Muñoz Marin, in contrast with Albizu Campo. Albizu Campo has always been my hero since I was 15. I did the Indian philosophy at 15, 16, reading Bhagavad Gita and trying to find myself. And I think the purpose of being a Puerto Rican in the United States, the attempt to find who I am. But the contrast piece was pretty interesting because depending on the view of the viewer, you would go for one party or the other. You go for Luis Muñoz Marin or Albizu Campo. Me, I would be Albizu Campos. Could I say? I've always been the only person that I idolized. But going back to the previous question, every single movement, I think, has helped to, in itself, educate me to a certain extent. I'm hoping the generation that follows will take it to the other esquina, because the esquina is like pretty long, depending on the avenue that you travel. So I think everything in hindsight is really well deserved, and the credit deserved for those who have struggled to at least allow an individual like myself to get some type of education. And hopefully the next generation, which is what I'm trying to do with my son, outside of the phone business. Because the personal touch, I'm always saying that the personal touch is the best touch. Nothing in the social media is awesome, but I think that the being here, participating, listening to what's going on in Holyoke, being a part of a particular movement, so life itself to me is like doing something for the next person, being of service, and I think granted, I'm by the book. For those who may not know, I've been in the attempt of starting a library, Hispanic American library. It's in the web. The web has to be revisited, redone. And my thought is to provide education on Latin American perspectives, going to the colleges or trying to see how the colleges or the school system can be part of the education for the student, even if I have to pay the professor out of this, away from the school funding. So there's got to be different approaches to really educate. So I applaud. I will be purchasing a book, and then I'll pass it along. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think this is our, maybe another minute or so, but so anybody has
Before we burn ourselves out.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all.